Hi everyone, my name is Ty and I'm from Thailand. This is my third time I'm getting involved in the Global Diversity CFP Day, but it's my first time having my own session here. So thank you for having me. In this session, I'm going to share my experience of giving a talk at JSConf Asia and everything that leads to it. This story spans from 2015 to 2019. I hope you enjoy and see if you can relate to some aspects of this story. Also, this is the first time I'm giving a full talk that isn't technical, and to be honest, I didn't feel very confident doing this. It's way out of my familiar zone. But isn't that the point of this event, to try something new? So I'd love to hear feedback from you. Please let me know how you think about this talk. And with that out of the way, let's begin. First, a little bit about me. So, I'm an introvert. And that skill where you go to someone and strike up a conversation, that doesn't come naturally to me. I have to actively work on that skill. And although most of the conversations turn out just fine, there's always this ever present social anxiety that I have to overcome each and every time I talk to someone whom I'm not familiar with. And as you might have guessed, years ago when I go to meetups, I would just watch the sessions and then go home without having any conversation with anyone new. At the same time, I love to build stuff and share knowledge. So my GitHub and my Facebook timeline is my main creative outlet. I don't chat much, and in fact, I dread small talks. So usually I would just do my thing and put it out there and kinda depended on people noticing it. And occasionally I would join open space events or barcamps. These are unconferences, which is a conference without any predetermined schedule. At the beginning, participants would post on the board about what they want to share and vote on the topics that they want to hear. The staffs aggregate them and post an agenda. So the event is very informal and you don't know in advance what's going to be there. So that's how I learned my speaking skills. Sometimes I would deliver a pretty good talk in these bar camps, and afterwards I occasionally get invited to speak at bigger events. So these are some ways that I became known in the local developer community, but outside I'm pretty much unknown. I've never submitted a single CFP and I never had to. I never gave a talk at an international conference, and it never crossed my mind that I should attend one. I was just chilling over here, and so that was 2015 for me. So if you're new to speaking, I would suggest attending at conferences and open spaces. These are informal venues where you can greatly practice your speaking skills. Its ad hoc nature means that there's not much expectation. A lot of talks there are improvised without preparation, and so you can just be yourself. It helped me to build up my confidence for public speaking, so I think you should try it. On to 2016, this is the year I began to volunteer and help in organizing meetups and conferences. It all started from a Facebook post by Om, a friend whom I met in past meetups. He was recruiting people who may be interested in organizing a React.js meetup. Many enthusiastic developers responded, raising their hands. We then met at a cafe and had intense discussions about React. Before long, it became apparent that everyone there has something to share. So we already have a speaker lineup. I met many people for the first time there, so my network has been expanded by a lot just from that meeting. We planned out the event, and after about a month, we organized our first React Bangkok. Now, one of the React Bangkok organizers I met is Net. Net regularly attends tech conferences overseas, and so he recommended JSConf Asia in Singapore to me. I was interested because, he goes to a lot of events, and if he recommends this one, it must be really good. I wasn't aware of that at first, but he also recommended me to JSConf Asia. Now, JSConf Asia has this contribute form, which is kind of like a CFP form, but not only you can send your own proposal, but you can recommend someone else as well, which is what he did. Unfortunately, the proposal wasn't accepted, and I decided to join as an event attendee, and that would be my first time to Singapore. JSConf Asia that year happens to have a competition called Code in the Dark, where contestants are challenged to implement a design using HTML and CSS without previewing. Since I've got many years of web development experience, I was able to do it quite well. And from that, I met a group of students from UST in the Philippines, and we became friends. We discussed about web development and other stuffs, and they taught me a lot of networking skills. The night after the conference, we went for a sightseeing walk around the city, and eventually I decided to extend my stay at Singapore to be able to hang around for a few more days. JSConf Asia also has lightning talk sessions during breaks, 5 minutes of fame as it is called. where attendees can submit a 5-minute talk and they accept talks in the first come first served basis. So I decided to give a short talk about a project I recently built and showing a bit of my speaking skills. And so that's what happened in 2016. So fast forward to 2017. In August, it was announced that the next JSConf Asia would happen in January of 2018. My experience in 2016 was so great that I immediately bought a flash sale ticket. In my work throughout the year, I also noticed a lot of inefficiency in how I'm developing applications. Some coding patterns seemingly makes the code look more clean, but at the same time it also makes debugging applications harder than it should. So I draft and submit a talk proposal about debuggability, and that would be my first submitted CFP. Eventually in October, Thomas from JSConf Asia reached out to me inviting me to speak. However, as we exchanged emails, I became increasingly confused because I'm getting invited to speak about React and not about debugging applications. Turns out it wasn't the proposal that I sent that was selected. It was Nest's recommendation the year before. Since it wasn't my proposal, I wasn't very confident in myself. I didn't even know if I would be able to find a suitable topic about React, or if the talk will turn out any good. But I decided to give it a try anyways, because there are 3 months left and I believe I can figure something out. So I thought about React related topics that I was interested in at that time, as well as the key learnings from my work that I would like to share with others. Then I made up a talk title, Data Container Components in React, added some rough idea and replied to the email. Spoiler, that wasn't the topic I ended up presenting. So the next day I went on a video call with Thomas and it became clear that I haven't fleshed out my talk's content yet. Thomas gave me some time to work it out and I asked him for advice about the audience. I thought long and hard about a story I would like to tell, and 4 days later, I replied with a new proposal, this time with more context, details, and numbers. Finally, in November, I submitted the final talk details. So looking back, Rao, I think that there are many things that I did. Many things kind of happened to me as well. Like, if Ned didn't recommend me to JSConf Asia a year before, I wouldn't have been invited. And if JSConf Asia didn't have several venues for introverts like me to show their skills, my trip to Singapore would have been a short one, and I wouldn't have made any lasting connection. As I think about it more, it occurred to me that what seemed to me like an extreme luck is to the other person a conscious decision to give me a chance. Getting to where I am right now required a lot of push from others. And it kind of makes sense that sometimes there are going to be people who might need a push from you and me as well. So I've learned to give support to friends in the community who need it when I can afford to. And I suggest we all do the same. So if you're new to speaking, I think that having a strong network of like-minded people is really important. As you've heard from my story, Net was able to submit a better proposal for me than I can do on my own. So it's possible that sometimes a friend might see something in you that you don't see yourself. Here are some ways to learn networking skills. If you're an attendee, one way that has helped me a lot is to make it a point when attending events to try to get to know at least one new person. And if you run out of words, you can try asking if they'd like to join a random circle with you. It's much less scary than joining a random circle alone. If you're not really good at starting conversations, see if you have other kinds of conversation starters. Maybe participate in quizzes and submit lightning talks. If you like arts, you can try working on some visual project on your laptop. Maybe someone might get interested in what you're doing and come talk to you. Even a t-shirt can sometimes be a conversation starter as well. Another great way to expand your network is to volunteer in organizing and running events. That was how I got to know Ned in the first place. Finally, should your opportunity arise, you may find yourself feeling a bit unconfident at first. While it's good to not overestimate your own abilities too much, also remember to not underestimate them. Without that principle in my mind, I would have turned down the invitation. Okay, so 2018 came and I still haven't prepared my talk yet. I'm deadline driven and that's pretty much the only time I'm productive about anything. So in this section, I want to talk a little bit about how I prepare my talks. Everyone's presentation style is different, so what worked for me may not necessarily work for you. But later today, you'll learn more about preparing your talks from other great speakers. So here we go. I believe we all know people who are natural storytellers. They can tell amazing stories that keep me at the edge of my seat. And it seemed like they did not have to prepare anything at all. They don't even need slides. They just go on the stage and nail it. I'm not one of them though. I stutter a lot as I record this talk, and there has been many jump cuts. But that's fine. We can all tell good stories, I believe. We've all seen great movies, and we've all sat through boring lectures, and so we can study them and see what makes them great or makes them boring. For me, a great tech talk is the right combination of these ingredients. It gives you practical knowledge, and at the same time, it's also an audio visual experience. It's not like being fed with raw knowledge, but more like getting invited to go on a journey with the speaker. So when I prepare my talk, I ask myself, how can I take this knowledge and turn it into a movie? I use this principle to guide my talk preparation. I also asked Thomas for some speaking advice, since it's going to be my first talk at a large conference, and he recommended the TED Talks book to me. I bought the audiobook and had a listen, and it was really good. It's full of practical advice and examples, and I would really recommend everyone read or listen to it. And now, let's dive into the keynote file. So, this is a keynote file for my first talk at JSConf Asia. You see that I use a lot of slides with arrows and annotations to help direct the viewer's attention. I adopted this style from Santimet's talks, which have quite advanced contents, but presented in a way that's very easy to digest. I learned a lot of my presentation skills by studying the works of the masters, and then adopting the techniques into my own talks. For example, when I want to show how the code evolves, I learned to prepare the space for the new code to appear first before actually inserting it into the slide. That can make it easier to follow. I also made sure that each slide brings only one new idea at a time. If there are bullet points, they are shown one by one so that the audience don't read ahead of what I'm saying, which can be distracting and disrupting to the flow of the story. Speaking of which, the whole talk is all scripted. As a non-native English speaker, whenever I rehearse without a script, I always find myself stuck, struggling to find the word to convey my point. So I just write down everything I have to say and synchronize it with the slides in advance. Sometimes I would even write an incomplete sentence just to finish it in the next slide. This forced me to articulate my thoughts into words ahead of time, and it helped making the rehearsal much smoother, even when I'm not reading it. Most of the time, I don't read the script when I speak. I've seen people who present with a memorized script, and it can feel unnatural, so I try to avoid that. On stage, I just kinda let words flow naturally if possible. But when they wouldn't, I can always take a quick glance at the script. Next, I want to talk about my production process. So, my talk preparation process is, well, it's quite inefficient, to be honest. Usually, I prepare talks without an agenda or an outline. I don't plan in advance how to structure my talk, and I don't allocate how much time to spend on each section because, well, I just can't do it, and whenever I try to do it, nothing would come to my mind. Everything is just blank. So instead, I had to learn to use this inefficient process more efficiently. I learned and set up custom keyboard shortcuts to be able to use Keynote faster. I start from the first slide and try to progress the story from there, switching between creating slides and writing scripts. For each minute of new talk content, I rehearse the whole talk from the beginning. This gives me the chance to reflect on the story so far, allowing me to focus on how the narrative is flowing from one point to the next, and it also gives me the practice needed to deliver the talk smoothly. I also record the time it takes for me to deliver each section so I can get a sense of the timing. The main disadvantage of this approach is I never know how long my talk will be until I finish creating it. Most of the time it will be too long and I will have to cut some contents out of the talk so that it fits in the time slot. Sometimes I have to cut out a whole section. So now I hope you have an idea of how I produce my talks. Again, everyone's presentation style is different, so I suggest you find a workflow that works for you. Since I'm very deadline driven, I figured that I need to block out some time to concentrate on preparing my talk. So, a week before the conference, I flew to Singapore, and at that time, my talk wasn't even half finished. When I arrived at Singapore, I traveled around, went to the carnival, have some great food, and ride a Segway around the city. And now I'm close enough to the deadline that I can finally activate the productive mode. Then for about 3 days, I mostly stayed inside my hotel room and spent all day crunching out talk contents and rehearsing the talk over and over. I also take a plenty of breaks, biking around the neighborhood. So yes, it's very intense, but it's not stressful at all. It's more like I want to do my best and I was having fun. And finally, the conference starts with my talk about 90% complete. I prepared my talk very intensely a couple of days before, so I can just enjoy the conference and all its activity while it happens. I still work on my talk at nights though. And finally, it's the day of my talk. I got so nervous, and I remember in the last 20 minutes before my talk starts, I had to run back and forth between the backstage and the washroom 3 times. That's how much nervous I was. But finally, I did it. I gave the talk. After I finished speaking and walked down the stage, some attendees came to discuss with me further. So the talk sparked a really great conversation. In fact, it was the last day at the conference, and I had much more conversations after the talk than before, and none of them is small talk. It's much easier to strike up conversations with someone when I know we have things in common. And, giving a talk is the easiest way for me to show everyone what we might have in common. I never knew that giving a talk could change the conference experience this much. I mean, I give talks at local conferences before, but at a large international conference, the difference is astounding. So, yeah, that was a blast. Being speaker opened up a whole new layer of experience. And so that's the story of me giving a talk based on someone else's CFP. After the conference, I traveled around for a few more days and then went back to Thailand. So if you're new to speaking, I would suggest finding your favorite presentation style. Just like how you would cook a meal for yourself, when preparing talks, I want to prepare something that I myself would enjoy watching as well. And also, find rooms to experiment. I attended a lot of barcamps and open space events, so I experimented with a lot of ways to present. Sometimes I would spend days trying to make the details a bit more perfect. Sometimes I would prepare the talk just 2 hours before giving it. Sometimes I just totally improvise without any slides. And sometimes I make a pre-recorded video like this one. And as you would expect, it is a mix of hit and miss. But these experiences, they all teach me how to get better at speaking. So that year flew by, and before long it was the New Year's Eve. On this day, most people would probably go counting down, celebrating New Year. But as introverts, I and a few friends gathered at a 24-hour coffee shop. The cafe is less crowded than usual because, well, most people are outside partying. One of the things we did there was writing CFPs and submitting them to the conference. And in the last minute of 2018, I submitted another CFP to JSConf Asia. 2019 came, and a few weeks later, finally, my own CFP got accepted. So in this last section, I'll go over what I have written and also explain the thought process that went into the CFP. By the way, I published the original CFP text on my website, so you can read it there as well. So this is what I had written. JavaScript apps have to deal with a lot of asynchronous operations, especially real-time collaborative apps. Here I'm describing the state of affairs in the JavaScript world and what's currently trendy these days. I work at TaskWorld and we build a real-time collaborative app. Here I establish my relevance to the previous sentence. The race conditions are often overlooked, leading to data inconsistency problems. The goal of this talk is to help developers to not forget to handle race conditions. Here I'm describing a real-world problem that happens and the consequences that follows, as well as proposing a solution. It does this by 1. Showing examples of simple race condition problems along with simple solutions to these problems, and 2. Showing a series of complex scenarios that our app has to deal with. Here I quickly elaborate on how my solution is like. I also wanted to convey that I will start simple. It will be easy to follow for everyone. But later things will get messy and there's going to be a bit of drama. To my knowledge, these complexities are never mentioned in any tutorial, and these complications only appear when we scale our product to more customers. I wanted to suggest that a lot of troubles could potentially be saved had they known about these concepts, and that this talk will be a reflection of my experience and not a lecture. I've talked with 3 groups of people about this story. They all found the examples to be intriguing, and say that they've, quote, never thought a CRUD app has to be this complex. Here just want to add some testimonials to convey that I do have a story to tell, that I have told it several times before, and that people agree that this would be a good topic for a talk. As a result, I hope the audience will gain an appreciation of race conditions in real-world apps. I hope this talk will remind them to always handle race condition whenever they write an async function. I hope this talk can serve as a reference to future developers. Here I describe my vision for the talk, the desired impact, what kind of impression I hope to make for the audience. This talk is not specific to any framework, library, or language. I believe it can benefit the whole developer community, not just JS. So I end with the scope and relevance for this talk. So that was my CFP. Again, you can find the CFP text in my website. The talk name is Race Conditions in JS Apps. I also added an early sketch notes for the talk below, so please check that out if you're interested. So if you're new to speaking, I just want to say when you write your CFP, do sell your talk. Don't exaggerate, but don't be shy either. So in closing, I just want to say this. Throughout this session, I have showed you my best work, but I have to admit, this kind of work doesn't come often. Most of the time, I couldn't come up with anything like that, or rather, anything at all. Other times I've submitted CFPs overseas and get rejected as well. For me, speaking is a creative endeavor, just like writing articles, composing music, making videos, or even coding. To put things in perspective, I've got 50 articles published on Medium, and maybe that sounds like a lot, but I have over 100 articles that I've never published. On my SoundCloud page, I've released a few songs, but on my computer, I've got so many project files that will never be published. And that's fine. The most important thing for me is that I learned to always act on my creative impulses. Whenever there's this flash of inspiration, I immediately take notes. And although most of the time it didn't lead me anywhere, every single time it prepared me to be able to take on more ambitious works in the future. So I learned to never shut them down. As I wrap up this talk, I just wanted to say that it's fine if you couldn't come up with a compelling CFP today. Some healthy pressure is a good thing, but please don't push yourself too hard as well. Alright, so that's all I have for today's session. I hope you have a great time for the rest of today's event, and thanks for listening.